The Memphis Grizzlies have a few players dealing with injuries this offseason. But what about the guy who dealt with the injury at the end of last season? We haven't talked about him much in his status. Brandon Clarke injury update, community work with the Grizzlies, and Cedric Coward. More coming up here on Locked On Grizzlies.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host today, Damichael Cole, beat writer for the Commercial Appeal right here in Memphis, Tennessee, going solo on this Friday. So you know what time it is. You know what that means. It's Friday. It's Friday, and we got to get down on Friday, and we got a lot to talk about. But first and foremost, thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen each and every day. Make sure you continue to do that, listening on all Locked On Grizzlies platform or watching. If you watch on YouTube, you can listen on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Music, wherever you listen, wherever you watch, Apple Podcasts, Locked On Grizzlies is there. We appreciate you guys for tuning in. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by none other than FanDuel. Listen up. The thing about FanDuel is customers can bet just $5. All new customers got to bet is $5, and you will get a bonus bet of $300 if your bet wins. You bet $5, your bet wins, you get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. So make sure you go download the FanDuel app today. We got a lot to talk about in today's show on this Friday. We got a lot coming up with the Grizzlies. As I said in a previous episode, we're getting towards that time of the year, right? The players are starting to sprinkle in town, do a lot more work around town, which we're going to talk about in this episode. They're technically, a couple weeks out from the real deal, right? The first preseason game, I believe, is October 6th. Training camp will start, probably about a week before that. So you got a lot of events starting to take place with the Grizzlies here. And the most recent one, or check out my work over at thecommercialappeal.com, was a story I did on Brandon Clarke, because Brandon Clarke was at Kip Collegiate Elementary recently, school that features, I believe, K through 8. And Brandon Clarke came to the school and donated $1,500. The Grizzlies as well donated $2,000. So a combination of $3,500 was donated to the local nonprofit Arise to Read, which helps kids in the Memphis community, tutoring, with literacy and things like that. So one of the better reading programs for kids outside of the school system out there. But Brandon Clarke talked to the kids. It was a group of second graders. Talked to them about the importance of reading. Talked to them about the importance of being in school, how much it mattered for him. And after the fact, the kids wished Brandon Clarke a happy birthday and sung happy birthday to him. Real nice event over at Kip Collegiate Elementary. But Brandon Clarke, on the basketball side, as we talked to him after the event, he talked about all the great things he was doing in the community, right? Brandon Clarke is now establishing his own foundation. In recent years, we've seen this, with Grizzlies players. Marcus Smart had his foundation. I believe Jaren Jackson Jr., has his own foundation, and other Grizzlies players have kind of, went through the process of starting to, do more things in the community through their own foundation, so to speak. Brandon Clarke said it's something that he's considered for a couple years. He's thought about for a couple years, but he's now, this is, I believe, the first thing that he's done to this magnitude with this new foundation that he said it's going to be aimed at doing work for the kids, but also doing other things in the community as well. He mentioned, helping mothers. He mentioned, families dealing with tragedy. So shout out to Brandon Clarke, or as Doc Holliday, shout out to Doc Holliday would say, a salute, clap, clap to Brandon Clarke for his, achievements off of the floor as well as on the floor. And speaking of on the floor with Brandon Clarke, I asked him about the injury. I asked him about his injury, and the update on Brandon Clarke was, as expected, encouraging and positive. Here's the thing with Brandon Clarke. People heard about the injuries, right? And we're going back to March here. Brandon Clarke got injured, I believe it was against the Portland Trailblazers in a road game. This is when Taylor Jenkins was still the coach, and more on that in a little bit. But it was in March. Brandon Clarke gets injured, PCL injury, and immediately the fan base does a big gulp because shortly later it's declared that he's out for the season. And when you hear that PCL injury, history starts to replay because we don't hear about that injury much. But the last time that Grizzlies fans heard about that type of knee injury was Steven Adams. And nothing was the same after that. Steven Adams did not play in another regular season game for the Memphis Grizzlies, despite being on the team for pretty much another year. I mean, he was injured, I want to say, in January of 2023, and he was traded in February of 2024, but didn't play another game after that. And it was a weird situation. It was a situation where I think when he was hurt in January, nobody expected Steven Adams to be out for the season at that point. You know, he was going to be reevaluated some point. I believe it was in March, and it was pushed back and it was pushed back. And then it got to the point where people were still kind of holding out hope that he would be available for the playoffs or whatever the case may be. And then when that time came, suddenly 3-4 months into the process, it was decided that Steven Adams would not be back for the playoffs. He would be taking the entire offseason to, recover or whatever the case may be. Then preseason of the next year, I mean, if you remember this, I don't have to explain this whole thing to you, but I know everybody didn't remember the whole Steven Adams conundrum with the PCL injury. But yeah, just getting to the point here, Steven Adams comes back in the preseason, plays a game. I thought he looked decent. I'm like, oh, Steven Adams is back. Grizzlies, that drastically helps the ceiling. And then boom, the Grizzlies, Steven Adams decided that he needs surgery. Stem cell injection was what he got in March. He thought the stem cell injection was going to kind of get him back on the floor. But anyways, September comes, the Grizzlies, October, they decide he needs surgery, misses the season, gets traded, in the following February. All of that came to mind when Brandon Clarke got this injury. But to the Grizzlies' credit, they came out probably a week later after the injury and said, we consulted with many doctors, and from a unanimous decision standpoint, it was determined that Brandon Clarke does not need surgery. And by the way, this was classified as a high-grade PCL injury. This wasn't some little bruise. This was a high-grade PCL injury. But through consulting several doctors, the Grizzlies said it was a unanimous decision. Brandon Clarke does not need surgery. That was the way of saying, relax, everyone. We know the trauma that came with the Steven Adams experience. But in the case of Brandon Clarke, no surgery required. So that's why he had the offseason to recover. He haven't really heard too much from Brandon Clarke. He's had an eventful offseason. He went to Japan. He got engaged. But on the basketball floor, we haven't heard too much on Brandon Clarke. Well, he had a lot of good things to say in terms of, his knee, so to speak. Quite frankly, Brandon Clarke said that his knee feels good, which is encouraging. Brandon Clarke feels like he's going to be ready to go day one with his teammates. Another encouraging message from him. And pretty much here is the quote that he gave when I asked him about his knee from Brandon Clarke. He says, I'm ramping up right now, which pretty much all players are doing. He says, I feel great. I'm doing everything. Ramping up to play with my team on day one. I'll be there. Very encouraging words from Brandon Clarke there. Ramping up, I don't take much more from that other than the fact that everybody is ramping up, getting ready for the regular season. He said he's going to be out there day one. That's all that matters. What it means for the Grizzlies is now, especially the fan base. I'm pretty sure the Grizzlies been through this. But for certain that Brandon Clarke will be out there, while Zach Edey is unavailable at the beginning of the season. That is big. We talk a lot about, with Brandon Clarke, you get this defensive versatility alongside of Jaren Jackson Jr. Everyone knows, over the last 5, 6, 7 years, the lineups featuring Jaren Jackson Jr. and Brandon Clarke have been magnificent for the Grizzlies. And the big reason for that is because they play so well together. They know each other's games very well, and they can pretty much switch anything. Brandon Clarke is a versatile big who can guard pretty much 1 through 5 at a decent level, and Jaren Jackson Jr. can do the same thing. So it's two defensive versatile bigs who allow you to simplify your defense and have a lot of success because of that. Here's what I'm looking forward to as we talk about, Brandon Clarke. As I mentioned earlier in the segment, Brandon Clarke was injured when Taylor Jenkins was still the head coach. That injury in Portland, this was when things got real high because they lost that game in Portland. But Brandon Clarke was injured before Tomas Isolo took over. With that being said, we didn't get to see Brandon Clarke when the Grizzlies shifted their emphasis in certain areas. And I'm pointing that out because, as I've said on previous shows, when we talk about the players who were mostly affected by the change in offensive system last season, 3 players jumped out to me. The first 2 were easy, right? Ja Morant, everyone saw that. Zach Edey, people saw that as well. But the third to me was actually a clear third. Like, without a doubt in my mind, it was Brandon Clarke. Brandon Clarke was a guy who really thrived as a pick and, in the short pick and roll and getting to that floater and things like that. But in Isolo's offense, he had to create more of those floaters by himself because there wasn't many, 5-1 pick and rolls or whatever the case may be, where he's setting the screen for Ja Morant at the top of the key. Ja Morant's driving to the basket, drops it off to him, and he, does the little push shot floater like we've seen over the course of the years, or he's catching the alley oops. There weren't many of those opportunities in this new offense that had these guys spread out a little more, moving around the floor a little bit more. So we didn't get to see, in my opinion, just like with Ja, just like with Zach, we didn't get to see Brandon Clarke's strengths maximized in that offense. But when Isolo took over, you saw more of the screens, right? You saw more of the high screen and roll and things like that. And Zach Edey thrived because of that. But with Brandon Clarke, I'm excited to see what that'll look like for him. Listen, I mean, Brandon Clarke has been instant scoring, instant offense, all of that good stuff since he joined the Grizzlies, right? If you go through the numbers, Brandon Clarke, rookie year, 12 points a game. Year 2, 10 points a game. Year 3, 10 points a game. Year 4, 10 points a game. Year 5, 11 points a game. Like, he's always been a double-digit scorer. But then you go to last season, year 6, 8.3 points per game for Brandon Clarke. It wasn't because it was some drastic drop-off, with his field goal percentage, so to speak. He still shot 62% from the field. For his career, he's around 60%. But he only took 5.9 shots per game. And I think that was a comfortability thing. I think that was just simply, hey, this offense is different. And I got to get used to it. And it never kind of flowed with the way that we've seen Brandon Clarke play over the years. So Isolo's system, I'm looking forward to seeing how Brandon Clarke adjusts to that. But speaking of adjusting, we're starting to see Grizzlies players adjust, especially some of the new players, adjust to being in the Memphis community. We're going to talk about that coming up here on Locked On Grizzlies. But before we get to that, today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by OpenPhone. Look, OpenPhone, get 20% off of your first 6 months when you go to openphone.com/lockedonnba. OpenPhone, it's simple. It gives you the tools where every missed call out there could be money left on the table. And when every customer service conversation counts, you need a phone system that keeps you connected 24/7. OpenPhone is the #1 business phone that streamlines customer communications, and it works right through an app on your phone or computer. So no more carrying 2 phones or relying on a landline in this year. OpenPhone is the opportunity for you to go take advantage of these things. Look, OpenPhone lets your team share one number and collaborate on the calls and texts and like a shared inbox, so no customer will get left hanging. There's also a built-in AI agent, and it's a game changer. If you ask me, it is a complete game changer because it can answer the phone after hour calls, capture leads, and keep business moving when you're off the clock. See why over 90,000 businesses trust OpenPhone. Get started for free and get 20% off your first 6 months right now when you go to openphone.com/locked on NBA. Make sure you go take advantage of that now over at OpenPhone. The Grizzlies have been in the community a lot lately, and I think we're going to see that more and more and more as the NBA season gets here. And quite frankly, it's one of the things that I love to see. It's one of my things that you like to write about these things. These are the feel good stories. These are, as someone from Memphis, I always think back to when I was a kid, right? And I would see Mike Conley, I would see Zach Randolph, Tony Allen. Believe it was time we were really young with Rudy Gay. Like, you would see some of these guys do things in the Memphis community, and it sticks with you as a kid. And you remember those things, and seeing Grizzlies players show up and put in that time with the Memphis community is really important. Really important. But we mentioned in the first segment Brandon Clarke, right? Starting his own foundation. He has these things that he wants to emphasize, helping in the Memphis community. Think that's a big shout out to Brandon Clarke, who's been here now going on year 7. Remember, Brandon Clarke and Morant came in together. So going into year 7, Brandon Clarke has really kind of embedded himself in the Memphis community. You're going to start to see a lot more of that here in the next week as well. We know Jaren Jackson Jr. hosted his camp last week. Scottie Pippen Jr. earlier this summer had his first camp in Memphis and essentially made it free, to all visitors, to come out there and participate in his first camp. Jaren Jackson Jr., it was his 3rd annual camp. So salute to him for that as well. But you're going to start to see more here in the next few days. Follow my coverage over at thecommercialappeal.com because on this day, on Friday, you're going to see a couple more players do a community event that I can't really say what it is yet, but you're going to see it. And follow my coverage over the Commercial Appeal. We're gonna have interviews from those players. We're gonna talk about that event, and then there's gonna be Saturday, Memphis Redbirds game. You're gonna see a couple Grizzlies players come out to that game, and that'll be Cedric Coward and Javon Small. They're both going to be throwing out the first pitch. I guess one of them technically is going to throw the second pitch, but we'll see who gets to throw out first. But anyways, Cedric Coward and Javon Small have both been selected to throw out the first pitch in the Memphis Redbirds game on Saturday. So again, the two rookies getting embedded in the Memphis community. I remember meeting both of those guys and thinking like with Javon Small, a little bit more on the reserve side. So it's going to be good seeing him, get out in the community and kind of, start to, I guess, open up, to the arms of Memphians and things like that. You know what they say about Memphis, you love them, Memphis is going to love you back. So it's going to be interesting to see. And then with Cedric Coward, it's like a complete opposite. Cedric Coward walked into his draft introductory press conference interview, waving at the media saying, "Hey, everybody." Basically just this bigger personality, so to speak. But the Grizzlies are doing the work in the community now. This is something we're going to see over the course of the year, over the course of the season. We know when the holidays get here, the Grizzlies tend to do a lot of work with the team. Some players do their own thing off to the side, like we said, with Jaren having his own foundation. Now Brandon Clarke has a foundation. Morant has done a lot of things, on his own as well. And we saw Scottie Pippen Jr., do his camp. I think it's a great thing, about playing in Memphis. It's one of the better parts about, this city. The Grizzlies are the fabric from the standpoint of they are the professional team here. There's no NFL team. There's no NHL team here. The Grizzlies are the fabric of the city from the standpoint of a professional team that has millionaires, so to speak, that people love to support, and those players love to show the support back. You still have, a lot of the former guys still come around here, in particular Zach Randolph, Tony Allen. They are very embedded in the Memphis community. I still see them pretty regularly, so to speak. Probably see them more than I see a lot of guys who are on the team from the stand, like in the off season, not during the season, but in the off season, from the standpoint of their visibility and what they're doing in the city. It's a great thing, and they are great, kind of great ambassadors, I would say, for the city of Memphis. So look, if you live in Memphis, you live close to Memphis, continue to follow our coverage, continue to follow, the Grizzlies. You're going to see these guys kind of show, their faces around here. And I'm really intrigued in seeing Javon Small continue to open up, and then Cedric Coward, how the fan base kind of gravitates to him as well. Going to be important and fun to see that process, unfold over the next few months as well. But coming up here on Locked On Grizzlies, speaking of Cedric Coward, we got to talk a little bit more about Cedric Coward, particularly. There's this mystique about Cedric Coward right now. Let's talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But before we get to that, you gotta remember that today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here. That means the Packers are back on the field, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. You know what that means? Just go over to the FanDuel app. The Green Bay Packers play the Cleveland Browns this week. Easy money, piece of cake. Yeah, they got a good defense, but we got Jordan Love. We got a great receiving core, and we got the best defense. So go over. And if you're new to FanDuel, you can go bet the Green Bay Packers are going to go beat up on the Cleveland Browns. And if they win, hopefully, you'll get $300 in bonus bets. But there are so many other ways to bet. You might not like the Green Bay Packers. We got some Packers haters out here. And that's fine. Go bet on your teams or go use same game parlays. There are so many different ways. You can bet the spread. You can bet the money line on games. You can bet individual players to record individual stats. But take advantage of it because it's quick, easy, and it's the best way to add a little more energy to Sunday. So are you ready to play? If the answer is yes, download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Make sure you go take advantage of that now over at FanDuel. The mystique of Cedric Coward. If you're watching on YouTube, you see that's the name of our third and final segment. And I said that because this summer, I get a lot of questions about Grizzlies players in the summer, whether it's people from opposing teams or people calling or fans calling me about certain players. Like, Damichael, what do you think about this guy? What do you think about that guy? I've gotten so many calls, so many texts about Cedric Coward. And it's because no one knows. He's like Bigfoot right now. Everyone thinks what they'll get from Cedric Coward. You've seen some highlights. You saw the 8 games at Washington State where he's playing schools like Eastern Washington and whatnot. And you think you know what he can be. Especially Grizzlies fans, you see that 7'1", this massive wingspan, the shooting ability, the swagger, right? The confidence, the brassness saying, look, I know about grit and grind, and I want to be a part of that. You see all of these things that kind of feel like the making of a really good basketball player, but you haven't seen a jumper in a Grizzlies uniform. You haven't seen a dunk in a Grizzlies uniform. You haven't seen a step back. You haven't seen them sliding in defensive drills and all of that. So right now it's just a big ball of hope, right? There's this mystique that is coming, and we're about to start getting those answers. We'll talk to Cedric Coward on a Saturday after the game. We'll talk to him. I mean, after he throws the first pitch at the Redbirds game. And, of course, with the season start here in a couple of weeks. And one thing that I've said in the past, and I'll continue to emphasize until it changes or whatever, like the Grizzlies really like Cedric Coward. This isn't anything. This is not me, throwing anything at the wall. They like that guy. Anytime you trade up for a player, and what's going to be attached to this trade up because the picks, part were from the Desmond Bane trade. So he's kind of going to be attached to the name Desmond Bane of at least in the early part of his career. But you trade up to get this guy. He plays the position that, in my opinion, has kind of limited the Grizzlies' ceiling for years and years and years. When they've had Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., And they've had centers, Jonas Valanciunas, Steven Adams. You know, they've had solid centers. It's been that position in between. Dylan Brooks was solid, but the offensive questions, right? When they had Mike Conley, Tony Allen at the two, Zach Randolph, Marc Gasol, they were the core four. They couldn't be the core five because that position, after Rudy Gay was traded, there was never one answer where it was that's the guy who's going to help us be that final puzzle piece to get us to the championship. Never happened. But with Cedric Coward, there's hope. There's hope knowing that, hey, you got Ja Morant at point guard. Jalen Wells is a very solid wing that you can start on a championship team. Zach Edey, in my opinion, you can start him on a championship caliber team. And I think the jury's still out a little bit more there. But, I mean, you might not want to play him 35 minutes or anything like that. It's good to have a Brandon Clarke, to have that optionality. I do think that's important. But in terms of starting someone who's going to be physically imposing, who's going to set hard screens and do the things that you want the 5 men in your offense and Thomas Easlow's offense to do, Zach Edey is a great option. If you know you have championship goals in that area, I think Zach Edey is a great option. So you got Jaren Jackson Jr. So you kind of got this situation where you got 4 players again. But right now, there's that 5th spot. There's Gigi Jackson, there's Vince Williams Jr., there's Cedric Coward. Right now, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope feels like more of the short-term stopgap option, however you want to describe it. But Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is probably going to get the first crack at it. But we talked about it from the standpoint of, will he have the last crack at it? Will we get to February and will we be saying the Grizzlies need to start Cedric Coward? Will we get to February and Cedric Coward would already be starting? A Jalen Wells, Marcus Smart type situation where he just takes the spot and never relinquishes it. Or, nobody wants to hear this part, not on Locked On Grizzlies. Or, what if the 8 games at Washington State were just hype? It's a good start to a season, but he doesn't live up to the billing. What if? With all that being said, now I'm decently high on Cedric Coward as a prospect. The shooting is plus. That's what I'm usually when you have guys this size, 6'8", 6'9", massive wingspan, they kind of grow into becoming better shooters. But that size also tends to lend to strong defensive capabilities, especially in the NBA, where those physical intangibles are important. Right? We tried to downplay it a lot when the Grizzlies had Desmond Bane, who had a shorter wingspan. Then they had Dylan Brooks, who had a shorter wingspan. So you had Ja Morant in the backcourt, 6'2" point guard, and you had him alongside of 2 guys on the wing with shorter wingspans. Still managed to get the number 2 seed like that, which is pretty impressive, if you ask me. But you look around the league, you look at some of the better wing defenders, those dudes, most of them have long wingspans. I'm thinking of a team like the Oklahoma City Thunder, just won a championship. You got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander out there. You got Jalen Williams, Alex Caruso, Cason Wallace. All these guys, plus wing defenders, plus wingspans. So Cedric Coward gives you that. But right now, it's all hope. It's all dreams, right? And we can go off what we've heard. We can go off what we've seen. Truth is, we haven't seen much. Truth is, me as the beat writer, I haven't even seen much. But I've heard things. That's what we talk about on here, right? I've heard about him in the weight room, how Cedric Coward gets after it. I've heard about the shooting potential, how in those workouts, he's shooting the ball really well. And if you talk to him, shooting ain't something he's worried about as he makes the transition to the NBA. That's not the word. He's focusing on the dirty work. He wants to be a rugged defender. He wants to be a guy who can be impactful from day one. And guess what? It's not even guaranteed. It's not guaranteed that he'll be in the rotation from day one. He's got to earn that. You look at the starting lineup, we've laid it out. Ja Morant, probably Jalen Wells, Contavious Caldwell-Pope, Jaren Jackson Jr., Zach Edey. Zach Edey's out. Jaren Jackson Jr., Brandon Clarke, or probably Jock Landale, something like that. But then you go to the second level. You got Santi Aldama. He's going to play. Scottie Pippen Jr., Ty Jerome, they're going to play. So then you got this other spot in the wing because you got Ty Jerome and Scottie Pippen Jr. as your backcourt. You got one more spot on the wing. And then you got Gigi Jackson. You got Cedric Coward. You got Vince Williams Jr. You got John Conchar. It's 4 guys who I wouldn't be surprised would be in the rotation. 4 guys. More than likely only one of them will be playing those rotation minutes. We'll see how that turns out. But if the mystique matches what Grizzlies fans believe, the hype train that's been put behind Cedric Coward, he's going to be playing. He's going to be playing. He's probably going to be playing really well too. Can't wait to see it. Can't wait to talk to him this weekend as well. So coming up on Locked On Grizzlies individual, we're going to break down all of that stuff. But remember, before we get out of here, that Locked On NBA Top 100 is here, voted on by the NBA hosts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Our Top 100 was formed by the experts that cover these teams and players every day. Find the full Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Don't miss all the reactions on where the players landed. We've talked about it on here extensively, me and Joe Mullinax. Joe even brought it up in a recent episode. Kind of surprised me, but thank you guys for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies with us on today. Make sure you're back with us on Monday, because that's what we're going to have the recap from the conversation with Javon Small, with Cedric Coward. We'll get some answers. I think I got a pretty good idea of what Cedric Coward's going to say on the injury front, but we'll save that for Monday. But until then, thank you guys for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies each and every single day. Remember that Locked On Grizzlies is free and available wherever you get your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify. Until next time, I'm Damichael Cole, and we'll see you on Locked On Grizzlies.